When a company is reviewing a new license to acquire to make action figures, where they're going to have to pay up front to acquire the rights and have a relationship with a third party, the biggest factor isn't necessarily what the IP is, but how much is it going to cost? Because as I've mentioned in quite a few videos, action figures, anything made of plastic, comes from a plastic injection molding machine and has to use these giant metal tools that can cost from $25,000 to $100,000. And when you're designing a new line like Mattel did for Secret Wars back in the day, you'll notice that almost every character shares the same body. I explain why in this video, I'll link it at the end, and it's also why Hulk never appeared in the line. A similar thing to when Mattel was looking at the Ghostbusters line. This was something I worked on. I didn't work on the Secret Wars toys, I played with them. But when I grew up, I worked at Mattel and I worked on this Ghostbuster line. And one of the things that was very, very appealing, besides the fact that Ghostbusters is one of the greatest movies of all time and deserved action figures at 6-inch, 7-inch, 4-inch, every scale, well, they needed them. And we've had quite a few. In fact, here's Hasbro's take on them. And you'll notice Hasbro took the same tactic that Mattel did, where one body with a head swap, granted Venkman has different lower legs, will pay for the fully tooled figures. In other words, the figures that cost more are offset by the fact that you get 4 figures for almost no tooling, just a head. So that strategy it's the same strategy you see in almost every retail line with something like 6-inch figures, where you see 4 or 5 figures with low tooling and then 1 or 2 with moderate or high tooling. So why does this happen? Well, sometimes in production you hit a snag. Like, for example, maybe a line isn't meeting sales expectations. It's not doing the numbers, the velocity that is required by the company. That's usually how lines are monitored. Or maybe the content that was supposed to support a line doesn't do well. Well, this can create issues for a line that's in production, especially because you still have to deliver a lot of times, meaning you're required to still send out an assortment of action figures to market, but maybe you have less tooling dollars to use because your tooling budget's been slashed. This happens quite a lot. Now, of course, one of the easiest ways to reduce tooling budget is to remove an accessory. Sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't. It removes an entire piece of plastic and all of the deco costs that would have happened. But another way you can reduce cost is by removing articulation. So here was the Build-A-Figure for the first wave of Ghostbuster toys, and then when we got to wave 2 of Ghostbuster figures, these are the Hasbro ones. I'm not picking on Hasbro, I'm just using them because it's a good example of how the first figure for wave 1 was fully articulated, and then when we got to the second one, it was more or less a statue with arms that swung from left to right and a head that could look left or right. So I'm willing to bet that this figure didn't start off this way, that it started off as a fully articulated figure. The articulation was then removed to make it less expensive to produce, maybe because the sale, it could be a million reasons. I don't have any inside knowledge of this, but based on my experience, that's what I'm guessing. I know because Mattel, when I was on that line, had the same issue with our Dana Barrett figure. Here's Hasbro's fully articulated Dana Barrett, which was 100% tool. Her costs offset again by the fact that you got 4 figures with only new heads, with shared body completely, except for Venkman's lower legs. So that's how you're able to afford a fully tooled figure, especially with the numbers you have to do to be at retail, which is much higher than they were on the Mattel Matty Collector line, which was a tiny online line. So they get a fully articulated Dana. The Matty Collector version that I was lucky enough to have gotten to work on was this, which was more or less an non-articulated statue, a staction figure. Kind of similar to that Build-A-Figure from Wave 2 of Hasbro's product. Yes, he has articulated arms, absolutely. But she swivels at the waist, so there you go. All right. Now, this was also a direct reaction to the loss of tooling dollars. So essentially, as the Ghostbuster line on Matty, the sales sort of dipped and didn't do as well as they did in the beginning. The tooling allocation then, which is a reflection of sales, is reduced. So the solution we came up with, since we had committed to doing a Dana figure, was that we would basically do her as a statue, but we would basically give her the 2 most iconic poses that she's in. She's really only seen almost doing 2 things, sitting on the little bench rooftop thing and standing in a doorway. So we figured, hey, we could get a twofer by doing a shared upper torso and just swapping out the lower torso. And besides, what you really want your Dana doing is sitting on the roof bench, because, that's what she does in the finale, and, Sigourney Weaver looks beautiful doing that, and, this allows the cape, or the clothing, to drape, if you will. You don't get that with a articulated action figure. And the same thing with doing the lower legs. With the Hasbro version, which is articulated, yes, you could pose her in 1,000 different ways, but you actually can't pose her exactly in the rooftop pose. So, hey, sometimes turning a figure into a statue actually does have advantages, and I think this is one of the rare examples of when that worked. It was definitely trying to find a solution to an unexpected issue that we weren't expecting the tooling to be reduced, but it was as a reflection of sales, and this was a creative solution. Another great example of this is the Marvel Kenner Hasbro Marvel Legends Retro line. I don't know what it's officially called, the Kenner Retro line that Hasbro puts out. I know, it's confusing. What can I say? It's adorable, it's brightly colored, it's available at mass retail. It's basically exactly the type of line that thrives at mass retail. A lot of collectors, adult collectors, have been confused, saying, well, this scale doesn't make sense. It doesn't match, the Secret Wars line. It doesn't match the Toy Biz line. It doesn't really match anything. Marvel hasn't really been a 3 3/4 property. That's really a G.I. Joe Star Wars thing. So, yeah, and even if you compare them to current G.I. Joes, they're a little short, since G.I. Joes are actually more like 4 inches, whereas Star Wars is 3 3/4. That quarter inch really makes a difference at this scale. It's amazing. All right, so yes, so you're basically just getting a figure limited articulation. It's not like Marvel Legends, where you got fully articulated figures plus some kind of added bonus tchotch, whether it was a stand or a Build-A-Figure piece or alternate heads. You basically get bare bones. Every once in a while, a figure comes with an accessory like Falcon, because, you can't do Falcon without Redbird. All right, so why would you buy this when, for just a couple dollars more, you can have a fully articulated figure with a ton of accessories, maybe a Build-A-Figure piece, swappable hands, power effects? Well, as an adult collector, obviously these appeal to us. And the idea that Hasbro/Kenner would do something in a different scale that we don't even collect can be puzzling, but it's basically the fact that it's not for us, it's for kids. And I know you're saying, well, wait a minute, then why the Kenner logo and why the retro packaging? Kids don't care about that, and that's exactly the point. Kids don't care about that. They just want the toy at the juicy, juicy center of the package. And putting Kenner on the logo doesn't cost anything. The kid may not care about it, but it might get a couple adult collectors to buy a figure because it's got the name Kenner on it. It's a marketing choice. It's basically just because it makes it also appeal to adults, even if, yes, logically, of course, Kenner didn't make figures of Marvel. Mattel did, as noted earlier in the video, and the link is at the end. This is just one of those kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink things that's, yeah, of course, we know that Kenner didn't, but what if they did? Maybe this is what the branding would have looked like. And besides, these toys are for kids, and collectors buy them. Awesome. And why is this related to losing a tooling allocation? Well, this might not be losing tooling, but this was one where the toy was designed from the get-go to be a low-tooled figure. So let me kind of explain that, and it also is a reflection of the first toy we looked at, the Secret Wars. If you look at a 6-inch Black Series, Marvel Legend, DC Universe Classic, McFarlane, well, maybe not McFarlane, they don't use a template, but DCU Classics did, there are a lot of parts that make up the figure. A lot of articulation. Every joint has multiple parts, inside parts, outside parts. If you've ever taken a figure apart for customizing, you can see this. You'd be amazed how many pieces make up a 6-inch figure. All right, I think a better way to explain this would be to look at stick-fizz. Remember stick-fizz? Like back in the day, these were awesome. I'm still sad they went away, but I mean, most toy lines don't last 6 months, and they at least had a couple years.
He's back! In pod form.
All right, well, maybe not pog form, but stick-fizz are an excellent example to show what I mean by low-tooled line. So while stick-fizz were aimed at both the customizer who wanted to make their own action figures, or just someone who enjoyed the craft aspect, what stick-fizz was doing was it was taking the production aspect of the action figure and giving it to the consumer. This is exactly how action figures are assembled in factories. They come on trees like this, or sprees, and have to be pulled apart and then stuck together, or pulled from the master part. And this is because of how tooling works. When the hot liquid plastic is injected into the mold, then you're going to get your object. But it also is going to have a sort of a line to the outside of the tool where the plastic is injected, and this becomes the excess. It's called the runner. So here you can see a sprue and what's called a product, which is the cavity that you're actually getting. So a gate keeps plastic flowing into it and not the other direction. So that's why when you get things like army men that come out, they're attached to each other because all of the things in the mold come out together. So a figure like a Black Series figure that has a huge amount of articulation has a huge number of pieces. The more pieces, the more assembly. The more assembly, the more cost. A figure like this that has very little articulation, 4 points, that's going to cost way less simply because it has fewer parts. In other words, the less articulation, the less tooling, the less expensive it is to make. So a line that can use both shared parts and minimum tooling, like the Mattel Secret Wars line in the 80s, or what Hasbro is doing now, will do very well. It's why Pop Funko is able to do so much. They can fully tool every single figure because there's no articulation. They're making statues. Statues are incredibly cheap to tool. The more it moves, the more it costs. And whether you're dealing with having to come up with a creative low-tool toy line like Hasbro did with Marvel, or reacting like I had to do when I was on the Ghostbusters line, having to come up with low-tooling, less articulated figures as a solution may not be the best, but it's usually, under the circumstances, an option that will at least get the job done. I hope this was a good insight on how articulation and tooling are related and why low tooling, low articulation figures are often preferred by manufacturers. Leave your comments here. Let me know. Share this video. It really helps and it tells YouTube to keep sharing it. Thanks so much, and hail the algorithm.